I want to first thank Kevin Roberts, who is a friend, has been a pioneer in education, starting schools around classical education, a huge motivator for me. To have someone at the helm of Heritage that understands how critical education of the next generation is critically important, because I think education, I'm going to talk a little bit about this, should be issue number one for lovers of this country going forward. Otherwise, we lose our country. So, Kevin, thank you for everything you do. I love the tagline, America's Outpost in Washington, D.C. So, Heritage is America's Outpost in D.C. The Fox News Channel is America's Outpost in Manhattan. There's one square half block of sanity on that island, and we do the best we can surrounded. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be a member of Fox, to work for Fox and Friends Weekend. I see my role as information warfare. That's what I'm involved in. My job is to make a better argument than the other guy, speak boldly and courageously about the things that really matter, because my job's actually really easy. I get paid to give an opinion. And people throw slings and arrows at me, who cares? You know it's coming. It's far more difficult to be a teacher or a nurse or a line worker or a police officer who wants to be a part of the political discourse today, but knows if they tweet one thing or post one Facebook message or say something the wrong way, they could lose their job. You're not actually free if you can't say with your mouth what you're thinking with your mind. And so my job is to, I don't know exactly what clips they showed. I look forward to seeing that video. But whether it's on Fox and Friends Weekend or across any other program, be as bold and as clear and as truthful as possible so that everyone out there watching says, yeah, we can still say that in America, because there are so many quarters where you cannot. And I'm grateful for it. I'm also grateful for Fox Nation. Where's my beautiful wife? I want to embarrass her. She's hiding. She's right over there. She's a vice president of Fox Nation. The number 2 over there. And what Fox Nation does, her name is Jennifer, by the way, and now she's really embarrassed. They've been very bold in creating content nobody else is going to create. I just did The Life of Jesus, part 1 and part 2. And we didn't do The Life of Jesus, maybe this kind of sort of happened. I took my pastor with me. We read through the gospel, went exactly where Jesus was born, where he was raised, where he ministered, where he healed. Ultimately, the Mount of Olives, the Last Supper in the upper room, his final moments, where he was buried and rose and reappeared to the disciples. And it was the kind of content that says, this is what the gospel says and why it's true. And why if you bring Jesus Christ into your heart, it will change your heart. You're not going to see that on, well, CNN Plus is gone. But, I mean, that's in a week, you're right. You're not going to see that anywhere else. Or The Miseducation of America, which is a series about what has been done in our K through 12 classrooms. And we're 2 seasons worth, unvarnished reality and truth. Because we are in, as we're going to talk about in this panel, a sheer fight to stay free. My last book before that was called American Crusade, Our Fight to Stay Free. That's where we're at. Community by community, school board by school board, city by city, state by state, and across this nation, there is a Marxist political movement, call it culturally Marxist, call it progressive, call it what you want, that seeks the destruction of Western civilization and Judeo-Christian values, America being the most obvious representative of that over the last 250 years. That is their goal. And I wrote extensively about it in my most recent book called Battle for the American Mind, which, by the way, was number 1 on the New York Times list for a month. For 4 weeks. You know they didn't want to do that. We had to outsell everybody by multiples. Yet if you went to any bookstore or any airport, you know in the airport where it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the New York Times list, my wife will tell you, every time I went, I'm like, it's got to be there now. Not once could I find my book, even in my local bookstore or at an airport. I mean, they are actively trying to suppress anything we have to say, but thankfully Costco and Walmart showed the heck out of them. But what that book is about, I think, is the epicenter of how we can keep America free. And it's not that I think education is the most important. I think a lot of what you're going to hear up here, what I hope you'll hear over the entirety of this conference, 50 years of heritage, is that the first thing that matters is your relationship with your Lord and Savior and God. Where you are with God is going to dictate your personal compass. I mean, that's why our founders said we can't keep a republic without a religious people. They understood without God, you need the Leviathan of big government to dictate what's good and wrong, bad and evil, and eventually you slide toward more control. So I can affect that as an individual. I can affect that at home. The second thing is your family. I mean, what can you affect? Your kids and your grandkids. What they're exposed to, who they're surrounded with, whether they go to church, whether they're mindlessly scrolling TikTok. Those are things, so we talk about policy at an abstract level, and it's all important to talk about policy. Or we talk about the news at Fox all the time. But so if I wanted to, or we wanted to, we could start every subject with, wait, but where are they in relation to God? Is this a godless organization? Is this a godless community? Or what kind of family do they have? Did they have parents that loved them? Did they have a mom? Did they have a dad? Did they have relationships with them? Everything starts with those two very important ingredients. So I say that when I talk about education, because education, I believe, is the third cord of that strand. You've got the home, you've got the church, and you've got the schoolroom. And for too long, conservatives like us have focused on our home, and then we've gone to church on Sundays, and some church on Wednesday night, and then just sent our kids for 40 hours a week to a secular school that is pushing an entirely different religion. The working title of my book for the longest time was a 16,000-hour war. That's the amount of time that any school, but especially government schools, have with your kid or your grandkid from K to 12. And one of the characters you meet in our book from the Frankfurt School, by the way, those are Marxists who arrived in America in the 30s, and they landed at Columbia, and they had a new theory, and it's called critical theory. And Columbia is the most preeminent teachers college in America, so they took that critical theory and they pushed it to all the other teachers colleges and then into the unions, and suddenly we wonder how critical race theory has become the cause of the day. They've been working on it for 90 years. One of the quotes of one of those Frankfurt study scholars was, and I can't remember his name exactly, he said, what chance do the theists, meaning Christians or Jews, believers, what chance do the theists have with their 1 hour on Sunday and 1 hour on Wednesday night against our 40 hours of atheistic training in between? They knew it. Education has always been a political tool for the left. Whether it's Horace Mann or John Dewey, they dress it up as training for an industrial economy or a future. But underneath it all was a desire to change the culture and fabric of America. And I don't have the time to go into it all today, but when you meet all of the characters in that book or in The Miseducation of America, to a man and to a woman, they are atheists, socialists, Marxists, and communists. I'm not kidding. I'm not being hyperbolic. That's who they were and what they believe. They studied an early prohibitionist in the 1880s who pushed third grade curriculum into all the classes across America. She literally went across the country for 10 years pushing anti-alcohol curriculum. What happened 40 years later? A constitutional amendment banning the sale and consumption of alcohol. The progressives studied all this and said, school is our tool to change America. And so they started their own schools with their own prerogatives. And what's the first thing they had to remove? The story of the capturing of the minds of American kids is not what they put in, it's what they removed first. First thing they removed was God. God had to go. What did they replace? And it's a long story, so forgive me for moving through it fairly quickly, but what did they replace God with 40 years later or in the process? They took a cross and a Bible out of the classroom and they put up a flag and a pledge. You know, the original pledge was actually written by a socialist. It did not include the words under God in it. And listen, I love the pledge and I love the flag. Okay, I love them both, and they both are incredibly significant. I raise my right hand to defend them. But for leftists, they were a tool to pull us away from God toward statism, toward allegiance to the state. Because it was never about the spirit of 1776 for them. It was about more control. So now today, you see the 1619 Project, and they're happy to get rid of the pledge, and they're happy to get rid of the flag, because it was never what they were interested in. In our book, we talk about phases, and we went from a Western Christian paideia, and I'll explain that, to an American progressive paideia, to what we're living in today, which is a culturally Marxist paideia. Paideia is a lost Greek word. I didn't know what the word meant when I started writing the book. It has no direct translation in English. But it means the enculturation or development of our youngest. What we imprint on the hearts and souls of our kids. What we tell them the vision of the good life is. Because most of who you are, if you look at studies, is established by the age of 12 or 13. Most of what you believe, most of what you value, most of what you think is right and wrong, and that can change later on, but most of it societally and civilizationally is implanted by then. Do you ever wonder why they're not happy keeping gender studies in universities? Because the goal from the beginning was always to get gender pronouns into kindergarten. Because if you get a 6th grader who's been using their pronouns and believes a man can be pregnant to believe that to 6th and 7th grade, they'll probably not just believe it, but become an activist for it later on in life. The classroom is the key political tool of the progressive left, and I have bad news for you today. It is completely captured. It is basically gone. And that's why we wrote the book, is to disavow everybody of the excuses that, no, it's not my school. It's kind of like that idea of I really like my congressman, but I can't stand Congress. It's like, well, I know public education's bad, but my school's good. The principal's a nice guy. Or I know one of the teachers, she's a Christian. Between unions and teachers' colleges and politics and standards and testing and curriculum and pedagogy, the left controls it all. And they're in hyperdrive right now. One of the upsides of COVID was that parents were exposed to it. We wrote a chapter called the COVID 1619 moment. It's true. It's that moment that the laptops came home, kids are learning at home, the parents and grandparents are looking over their shoulders and they're saying, what is that? And parents revolted and looked for options. Explosion of homeschooling, explosion of classical Christian schooling, which I'm a huge proponent of, and I believe it's a lost art of education that we need in this country. But I don't want to leave you devastated at this moment saying it's all over. What you'll hear from the panelists up here as well is that we have an amazing opportunity at the state level right now to create a renaissance of education, of educational choice, of freedom for parents, to educate their kids in a way in which they become free thinkers, not cogs in a wheel or servants to a state, but free thinkers who seek wisdom and beauty and goodness and truth, and they can read Latin, and they understand the founding documents, and they actually study history. I was telling my brother, I went through high school and college, and I was first introduced to the idea of Western civilization, meaning Athens and Jerusalem, in my mid-20s, when I read a book called Smiling Through the Cultural Catastrophe by Jeffrey Hart. He's a professor at Dartmouth. Because the story's never told. You don't know why America's special. You don't know why Athens and Rome rose and fell. Who's Moses? Most kids in America today can't answer any of those questions between we don't have a shared story about how we got here and why it matters. That's what we need to give our kids. So the deliverable, from my perspective, is in your school choice is so important. It breaks the backs of the monopoly of unions who have completely, by the way, unions know they've failed. They know they have a bad product. And then find those schools out there that need your support, help fund them, help start new ones, because there is a renaissance in education happening under the surface. And I know the big behemoth of public education doesn't want to acknowledge that right now. But as conservatives, we have an opportunity to create a generation of 1, 2, 3% of God-fearing American young kids who are going to be our legacy as we fight to keep our country. Because we are in the middle of a fight for the very soul of our nation, and they're doing it in the classrooms underneath our noses, which means you can't even defeat it at the ballot box if you don't defeat it in your school. So I salute Heritage for everything they're doing on education. All of you who I know are involved in education, I think it's the front lines, and I'm grateful to be here on the 50th anniversary of Heritage. Thank you so much.